We looked at the top 10 surprise teams from this past college football season. Now it's time to look at the disappointments, the top 10 most disappointing teams from the 2024 college football season. And honestly, this list was a lot longer. It was harder to narrow this down to 10. The surprise team video, it was hard to find 10. Disappointments, it was hard again to narrow it down to 10 because there were a lot of disappointments. But we're going to start here at number 10, and I actually couldn't narrow it down to 10. I narrowed it down to 11. We've got a tie for 10th place. First, Kentucky. Kentucky goes 4-8 this past season. And what's even crazier is the way they started after losing a close game to Georgia and then beating Ole Miss. You know, you look at that start and think, wow, this team's going to have a really good year. And yeah, they didn't win another game except for Murray State. They lost to Vanderbilt. They lost to Florida. They lost to Auburn. They lost to Tennessee. They lost to Texas, and they lost to Louisville. So it was just a very disappointing season. It's a team that I think most people expected to get to, 7-5, 6-6, 7-5, maybe even 8-4. That's kind of where the expectation was for Kentucky, but not making a bowl game. Big disappointment from where this Kentucky program had really been. I mean, they've reached that level of consistency where they're pretty much in a bowl game every year, and it did not happen this year. And then we're also going to put Virginia Tech in there, tied at number 10. This is a team that a lot of people hyped up. A lot of people had this team maybe making it to the ACC championship. I wasn't as high on them. If you watch me in the preseason, I talked about how this team just offensively, I didn't think they had enough there to really make a run. I think I had them at 9-3. Still, I thought they would have a good season. You look at the Vanderbilt game. Obviously, that was a shocker. They lost to Rutgers. That's a game they could have won. They lost to Miami, a game maybe some people would say they should have won. Maybe that call at the end. So, yeah, it could have easily been a 6-0 start. They played Stanford after that. Actually, it could have been an 8-0 start because they were 5-3, and those three games I just named off were very, very close. They could have been 8-4. Then they wound up losing to Syracuse in overtime, lost to Clemson by 10, lost to Duke by a field goal, and they closed it out with Virginia. So this is one of those teams, and we'll do this at some point probably in January, where we're going to look back and see which teams were overrated or underrated, which teams were better or worse than their record would suggest. This is a team that was better than their record would suggest. So they were really just a disappointment because of the way they lost a lot of close games, and they were not the only team that we're going to talk about that was kind of in that category. So a disappointing season for Virginia Tech. They at least did make it to a bowl game. Number 9 is UCF. They go 4-8. Didn't see this one coming. I thought this was probably a 7-5 type team, maybe 8-4. And they started off great, won their first 3 games, but then it went downhill. They lost to Colorado, Florida, Cincinnati, Iowa State, BYU. They did get the win. What's crazy is they beat Arizona 56-12. They blew them out, but then they lost to Arizona State, lost to West Virginia, and lost to Utah to close things out. So a very disappointing season for them. Gus Malzahn, of course, he's off to Florida State to be the offensive coordinator, which will be very interesting. But yes, very disappointing season for UCF. Number 8, USC at 6-6. This one is, I kind of saw this one coming, but I didn't have the guts to predict it. I looked at the schedule, and I thought it was going to be tough for USC this year because I thought people were really underrating some of their opponents. But it's another team that lost a lot of close games. Like, they had opportunities in these games. You look at the Michigan game, really had a great shot to win that one. Lost to Minnesota by 7. Lost to Penn State in overtime. Lost to Maryland by 1. Lost to Washington by 5. Played with Notre Dame. So this is a team that was better than their record would suggest. It's kind of in that same category as Virginia Tech. Really didn't win. Who's their best win? Nebraska, Wisconsin. They really just did not win. Well, obviously LSU in the opener. And you saw that game, and that changed my opinion. I thought USC was a real contender, maybe a playoff contender. And again, they just could not win the close games. And that was a problem for some teams this year, just not finding a way to win close games. And those teams sometimes are the teams that make a big jump the next year. So obviously we have to look at the roster to see who's coming back. But just be on the radar for Virginia Tech, USC. Have those teams on your radar for teams that can make a big jump. And then also this next team, Auburn. They were 5-7. They're our number 7 most disappointing team. It was very similar. They lost a lot of close games. Lost to Cal by 7. That was that turnover-filled game. lost to Arkansas by 10, lost to Oklahoma by 6, lost to Missouri by 4. I mean, they had opportunities in these games. This is a team that could have very easily been, 9-3, 8-4 at least. And no, it was 5-7 for this Auburn team. Peyton Thorne just was not. I mean, we thought maybe he would take a step forward, and he just did not. And that was the difference. If you look at this team statistically, like total offense, total defense, they're actually a really good team. But again, lost a lot of close games, and it made for a disappointing season, not even making it to a bowl game. Let's go to number 6 now. That's going to be Wisconsin, another team that did not make it to a bowl game, a team that I thought was going to be pretty good this year. I really did. I missed the mark on this one. They blown out. So, yeah, Tyler Van Dyke going down with the injury. Do you give him a bit of a pass because of that injury? I think you do, because I think he was playing pretty good football in the first couple of games. Was not against great opponents, but still, you look at some of their losses. I mean, they got blown out. Iowa was 42-10, lost to Nebraska 44-25, lost to Minnesota 24-7. Just the way they lost some of these games, it was definitely a disappointing season. I'd love to see what could have happened if Tyler Van Dyke had not gotten injured. How good would this team have been? I think it's probably good for at least one more win, at least get into a bowl game. But this team, they've got a long ways to go. This program is not where I thought it was. And again, that record shows it, 5-7. Number 5, boy, we're getting into some really disappointing teams now. Arizona, this team, 4-8. A lot of people were hyping this team up as a team that could win the Big 12. I was not. Again, you can go back to watch my videos. I talked about Arizona and Kansas State. I said that those teams, I just didn't think that those teams were as good as people were suggesting. And I didn't think they'd be as bad as they were. But, Arizona, you look at their season, started off pretty well. They beat Utah. They were 3-1, but then they lost to Texas Tech, lost to BYU, lost to Colorado, lost to West Virginia. That was a close game. I lost to UCF. Talked about that a second ago. They did beat Houston, but then they were blown out in their final 2 games against TCU and Arizona State. So this was just not a very good team. And when you looked at the roster, you knew that especially depth was going to be an issue for them. And I think maybe you saw that coming down the stretch, losing and getting blown out in 3 of their final 4 games. All right, next we've got Kansas. Kansas, another one of those teams that was better than their record would suggest. They finished 5-7. It was just a rough start. You lose to Illinois by 6, lose to UNLV by 3, lose to West Virginia by 4, lose to TCU, lose to Arizona State by 4. All of a sudden, this team was 1-5. They lost a close one to Kansas State, lost by 2. Then they got hot down the stretch. They beat Iowa State, they beat BYU, they beat Colorado. These are 3 ranked teams. So it shows you what this Kansas team was capable of, but they just did not live up to those expectations because of the slow start. If they played the way they did in those 3 games earlier in the year, you have to think that they would have won at least a couple of those games and had a much different season. But 5-7, big disappointment for a preseason top 25 team. Utah, a major disappointment there. The Cam Rising injury again. This guy just cannot stay healthy. This is a team that I picked to win the Big 12. A lot of people, I think they were the favorites to win the Big 12, and they just didn't get it done. They lost to that Arizona team that we were talking about that was not very good. Lost to Arizona State in a pretty close one. TCU was a close one. Houston was a close one. This is another team that lost a lot of close games. BYU, 1-point game. Lost to Iowa State by 3. So they were close. So this is another team that you would expect to maybe bounce back next year. But this year, big. There's no way I would have thought this team could have finished under 500. No way. And they did. So they were a huge disappointment. Let's go to number 2. Staying in the Big 12, Oklahoma State. This team goes 3-9. That's even worse. And this was after a 3-0 start, after a win over Arkansas that they probably didn't deserve to win. Well, I shouldn't say didn't deserve. They got outplayed in that game. They deserved to win because they made the plays to win the game. But they were outplayed in that game for the most part and did make some big plays and again, made the plays to win. And they were 3-0, and they didn't lose. They didn't win another game. Lost to Utah by 3, blown out by Kansas State, blown out by West Virginia, lost to BYU by 3, lost to Baylor by 10, lost to Arizona State by 3 touchdowns, blown out by TCU, lost by 8 to Texas Tech, lost to Colorado 52-0. I have no idea why this happened. I mean, this is a team that I really thought was going to be good this year. Someone explained this one to me. I'll be honest, I didn't watch many of their games because I'm watching the teams that are, in contention for the playoff and in contention for conference races. I'm watching the better games, so I didn't really watch Oklahoma State much after that Arkansas game. I don't know what happened, but they were 3-9, just an unbelievable disappointment. But I'd say number one has to be Florida State. Florida State going 2-10. This is a team that went undefeated in the regular season last year, and they drop all the way down to 2-10. I mean, what can you say here? They did beat Cal, and they did beat Charleston Southern. That is it. And most of these games were not close. They lost to Duke by a touchdown. That one was pretty close. Lost to Memphis by 8. Lost to Georgia Tech in the opener by 3. But most of the games really weren't even close. Really didn't have a chance to win. This was just a bad football team. And now that I kind of reflect back on this season, remember that very first game, Florida State, Georgia Tech, in Ireland. That's how we started the season off. And now we've gone all the way through the regular season, through the conference championship games, and we're getting ready for the first 12-team playoff. It's been a crazy season. It's been a fun season. It has definitely been one of the more exciting seasons in college football. But yeah, Florida State, I mean, it started with the quarterback position. DJ Uyunglele was not very good. I could have told you that before he got there. I thought he would do better than he did, but he was terrible. He wound up getting hurt. I mean, they had offensive line was awful. The defense looked good at times, but the receivers were terrible. I mean, this team was just not very good. It's as simple as that. They had all these transfers they brought in, and they developed some young guys, and they had the perfect mix last year. But with all those guys gone, a lot of leaders on this team gone, it's now a complete rebuild mode for Florida State. We'll see if they bounce back next year, but to me, this was the most disappointing season this season. From 12-0 to 2-10, just an unbelievable drop-off there for the Seminoles. So who do you guys think was the most disappointing team? And who did I maybe leave off the list? Again, I talked about it. There were some other teams that could have made this list. Who did you think was disappointing this year? Let me know down in the comments below.